Hello and welcome to my desk. This is Candela Obscura, the first role-playing game from Derrington Press, the publishing arm of Critical Role. It is a rules-light, narrative-focused horror role-playing game set in a fantastic world similar to Earth in the early 20th century. In this Game Master's perspective, I will briefly go over the rules and the world, share some of my highlights, tell you what I like and don't like about it and what I would change. In the end, I will tell you who I think this book is for and what other role-playing books you could use this with. So let's get started. To explain the rules, let me get out a character sheet. Candela Obscura uses a D6 pool system. If your character performs an action where the outcome is questionable, that is maybe dangerous, you make a roll, you take a number of dice corresponding to your action rating on the 9 different actions that are separated into 3 categories. And you can have a maximum of 3 d6 from that. To that you can add more dice, for example by spending a drive point or several drive points. Also, the other characters in the group can help you and spend 1 drive point to add 1 die to your roll. And there are types of equipment you can use or use up to add more dice to your roll, to a maximum of 6. Roll all of these die. 3 or under is a failure. That means that dire consequences will be had and your action didn't succeed. 4 and 5 is mixed success. That means that the action probably succeeds, but you're taking some consequences. Maybe it's not as good as you thought. Maybe new trouble shows up, or maybe you get some damage. And finally, only a 6 is a real major success. Your action succeeds, no drawbacks. If you manage to score several 6s, that's a critical success, your action succeeds and beyond you were hoping for. To make sure everyone knows what you're rolling for, what the stakes are, you have to ask your GM and have a conversation about what you can expect will happen, what the consequences might be, and what the stakes are. How badly will you be in trouble if you fail the roll? There are 4 categories. There are low stakes, only a little bit will happen. Standard stakes, maybe a significant danger, a bit of damage, or high stake, where mixed success will put you in immediate significant danger or cause major narrative consequences. And then from the errata that you can download on the Candela Obscura homepage, we learn that there are life or death stakes. In the most dire of circumstances, 1 failed roll can mean that your character dies. Usually though, instead as a consequence you might get marks, which are a form of damage. Body marks is exhaustion and injury, brain marks you get from fear and stress, and bleed marks you get from magic corruption. When you get damage through the consequences, you mark off the corresponding number of marks, and once you would have to mark a 4th mark, your character is instead incapacitated and they gain a scar. They might be blind, maybe they have lost an arm or have major back injury, maybe they have nightmares and trouble sleeping at night, or crippling paranoia. Or maybe they get a bleed scar, maybe they've lost their shadow, or they are possessed by vengeful spirits. Additionally to the narrative consequences of the scars, you will have to move a point from one of your actions to another action. Mechanically, your character does not get worse by the scars, but they become different. And I like this mechanic a lot. In a horror game, Call of Cthulhu for example, it's very easy for a character to die, become insane, or become so scarred and maimed that they are unplayable. And that's fine for a one-shot. But if you play a campaign, a more long-form format like a series, then you don't want your main characters to die or become insane every other episode. And this is a way that failure has severe narrative consequences without the characters becoming unplayable or dead. Other mechanics you can rely on, as I said, is the drive you can spend to get you more die, the resistance. Once you have 3 drives maximum, you get a point of resistance in that category, and you can spend that to reroll. A major factor of your success at any given action is how much of your limited resources you are willing to spend on that roll. Do you want to spend drives to gain extra dice? Do you want to spend your resistance to reroll? And then there's the mechanic of the gilded die, noted by that small rectangle left of the action. That means you replace one of your action die with a gilded die. And if you take the gilded die as the result of your action, even if it would net you a lower result than one of the other dice maybe, you get 1 point of your drive back. And that's all a gilded die does. And I think in most circumstances it's not worth giving up a success just to get 1 drive back, because the resources you will have to use up for a failure are probably higher than 1 point of drive. That's my opinion at least. Characters furthermore defined by their special abilities. At the beginning of the game you get 1 special ability from your role and 1 special ability from your specialty. And that can be something like behind me. Spend 1 nerve to choose an ally in the same scene who is about to take a mark from a phenomenon. Then describe what you do that allows you to take the mark instead. Or tenacious. When you have 1 more bleed mark, gild an additional die on move, strike and control rolls while in danger. So special abilities, exceptions to the rules that give your character something to do that only they can do. Character creation shouldn't take too long. First you just choose one of the 10 classes, then determine the action ratings. You have some starting ratings from your past, and then you spend some additional points to customize that. Determine your drives, determine your resistances. Again, you have starting values and some points you can distribute yourself. Same with the guild actions, same with the abilities. You choose 1 from your role, 1 from your specialty. This is fine and all, especially for beginners. But I personally find this whole class structure to be a bit limiting. And for an experienced player, it might be an option to say you get a number of points to distribute between your actions, then set your drives, etc. And then choose 2 abilities from any role and any specialty to create the character however you want. And character details like name and what they look like. Huge step is forming relationships. We've got 4 pages of examples for relationships a character could have to another character in the group. And once the whole group has created their characters, you're creating your circle. Your special circle of investigators that belong to the larger organization Candela Obscura. Determine what your circle is all about, give it a name, choose where your chapter house is located, maybe in an empty office, maybe in the back room of a bar. And your circle starts with a special ability that all of your characters profit from. And then you get some resources that can be used up between assignments, between adventures, to heal your characters and prepare for the next adventure. And these are limited resources, so you have to make a decision who gets to spend them, what you want to focus on to regenerate your characters. You don't just heal to full automatically. Character and circle advancement. Basically, you get experience points called illumination for your entire circle. And once this ring is full, your circle levels up, meaning you pick new circle ability, and also each character levels up. So far, so good. but what you get illumination for, I have to disagree with. For one, you get 1 illumination for every of these questions that you answered yes for. This is basically, have you completed the main mission of Candela Obscura? Did you contain or destroy a source of bleed? Did you provide comfort or support to those affected by a phenomenon? Did you bring something of importance back for Candela Obscura to protect or study? This is the main mission. If you fulfilled your main mission, you get up to 3 experience points. But then you earn 2 points if some but not all players fulfilled an illumination key. This is this. This is, did your character act like your character class is supposed to act? If you didn't, you get less experience points. And there are already other systems in place to have you act like your character class. It starts with your very actions. You will only want to use the actions that you're actually good in, and those come from your character class. Your special abilities come from your role and your specialty, so from your character class. And you also have your gilded die that you can only use if you act in the actions you have that in. Those come from your character class. And this is a third system to make you act like your character class is supposed to act. And I think this is just too much. What I would do instead is add 4 more questions to here. Since this game puts a huge focus on the relationship between the characters, my first question would be, have the actions of your character been influenced by your relationship to another character in a meaningful way? Did your relationship to another character change in a meaningful way? And then 2 more questions to facilitate the kind of playstyle you want to see. Maybe hand out an experience point if a character has gained a scar, or if their actions have been heavily influenced by a scar. Maybe hand out an experience point if they have risked their lives for another PC. Or maybe hand out an experience points if they have taken dramatic action to keep the secret of the magical world from becoming public knowledge. Make this a list of 7 questions, so you still can earn 1 to 7 experience points just as in the standard system, but don't use illumination keys. I find these illumination keys redundant and boring, to be frank. Use more questions. In the back of the book we find a very solid game master section that teaches you the principles of how to run a narrative-focused game like this, that you should indicate what dangers are coming, foreshadow accordingly, make your characters, make the players choose between different options, oftentimes most of them bad, show them the danger, tell them how effective their actions will be before they roll. Tell them how limited the effects of their actions are, how much success they actually have when they roll the dice, so they know what is at stake when they invest their resources to buy more dice. Tell them the consequences, and once they have rolled, go through with the rewards and the consequences that you had settled on. We have Session 0, Preparing Adventures. We've got some advice how to run combat, how to get out marks and damage. There are no dedicated combat rules in this game. Combat is just a scene and an action like any other and has no special rules. But if you want to, you can use a countdown dice to slowly count down maybe the damage that a monster takes, or maybe how long it takes until the guards show up, or the fire spreads, or anything. So the players know what is at stake and how much effort they should spend on their actions. This chapter ends with some example assignments or adventures. These are all investigation into supernatural phenomena. So we have the premise, what is actually going on here, some details, some threats that the characters might face, notable NPCs, and in my opinion this is a bit brief. This is just enough to get you started and prepare your own adventure from this. Especially when it comes to NPCs and threats, I would have liked a more detailed description so I don't have to fill that out myself. The NPC description barely gives me anything to work with. For example, we have Tang Yuan here, the foreman for the logging company. Heckley and Wild is desperate to get the situation under control. So at least we have a name and the motivation, but what are they like? What do they look like? What do they value? What do they fear? How do they act? Do they have a tick? How do they talk? Nothing for that. And if they had just given me a bit more, double than this maybe, to fill in a bit more, I would have liked that. For these example adventures, we also have an example of how the adventure could play out. But since this is a narrative-focused game, you have to be flexible as a GM and adjust to what your players are doing. Come up with the actual scenes and the actual events on the fly. I find this style of narrative-driven game is harder to run than just a dungeon crawl because anything could happen and it's a bit harder to prepare, but it's a very rewarding experience, this form of collaborative storytelling. In that way, Candela Obscura is similar to Powered by the Apocalypse games like Monster of the Week or Mythos World. But those games put more creative power into the hands of the players. The actions and consequences that the players choose drive the story way more than they do in Candela Obscura. That's not a bad or a good thing for any of the guys, that's just a style thing. There's more responsibility for improvisation and the narrative on the GM in this game, but that means that the GM has also more control over the narrative than in a Powered by the Apocalypse game. And after these examples, we have some additional assignments. Then we've got some GM resources, example chapter houses, locations, example NPCs, example special gear, example artifacts, and example creatures. All of which you can use to build your own adventures. I think especially the creature section and the artifact and magic section are a bit brief. Would have loved more creatures with a more detailed description, not necessarily pictures, because not knowing what the horror looks like is sometimes more horrible than any picture that they could put in here. But more story hooks, more ways to use the monster. Example actions that the monster could take, how they act. And more magic, not necessarily artifacts, but maybe magic spells that you could give out to the players or that the NPCs could use. Would have loved to see just more of that. Candela Obscura also comes with a default setting, the Fairlands. The town of Newfair and the Fairlands are described in this book. And from there, technology, economy, in general society, fashion, architecture, these are similar to early 20th century Earth. So you get steam-powered trains, the first cars, the first electricity, but you get more fantastical elements. You get, for example, way more airships, which I find awesome because I love airships. Notably absent from the Fairlands is institutionalized racism, homophobia, transphobia, or other forms of prejudice that were so prominent in our world of the time. Though the world is still recovering from a major war, refugees are still flowing into the city. Greedy politicians, corruption, abuse of power, religion, greed, poverty, and so on, all of that still exists within this world, just not this. The biggest difference between the Fairlands and our real world, of course, is the supernatural, the magic. There exists a magical parallel world, an other world, and where the border between worlds, where the flare is thin, the power of magic, corrupting influence, bleeds into the real world. And that can have horrific consequences called phenomena. You get creatures and monsters, environmental hazards, spirits, ghosts, entities. And since the civilization that existed 2000 years before the current civilization were masters of magic, they crafted a lot of artifacts that use magic and make use of magic, but they all draw from this corrupting power and they cause bleed and all of the corruption and horrific effects that go with the bleed. There are several secret organizations that work with magic, work to keep magic secret from the general populace. The general population does not believe in the existence of magic. For them, it's all fairy tales. But Candela Obscura and the other organizations know that magic is very real, very powerful, and the goal of Candela Obscura is to contain the danger and the bleed and keep the population safe. In this book, it is assumed that the players are members of a circle, of a chapter in one lighthouse of Candela Obscura, work together with the rest of the organization. But there are also other organizations. There's the Exoteric Order of the New Sciences, Eons, who want to use the scientific method to study magic phenomena and make it usable for the betterment of mankind. Then there's the Office of Unexplained Phenomena, OUP, a government organization who just wants to keep the secret. Then there's the Pyre, a part of the church, a type of inquisition that combats magic with magic. Now we've got the Red Hand, a criminal underground organization of smugglers and dealers in magical artifacts. Finally, the most mysterious of these clandestine organizations are the Unabridged. These immortal sorcerers have their own long-term goals, but no one knows what it is. And seeing all of these different secret societies, I can't help but think that there's potential in the setting for more than just Candela Obscura. Your player characters could belong to any or several of these factions, a bit of Vampire the Masquerade or other World of Darkness games. And the plans and intrigue and diplomacy between all of these factions could become the major focus of the game. And let's not forget that the Fairlands are recovering from the last Great War, similar to the First World War in our own time. And just like the First World War, this has ended, but the conflict has not been resolved. And the next last Great War is already brewing. So this war was resolved by using weapons of mass destruction. They have been described as electrical powered thunderstorms that electrocuted the entire enemy army. But as someone who knows a bit about physics, you can guess that they were actually magic weapons. And now the enemy is developing these weapons as well. So this world is moving from the First World War directly into the Cold War, with magical super weapons and monsters to flavor it. And together with the secret organizations, you could have a quite intriguing game of mystical spycraft and intrigue, I think. Anyhow, you get a pretty good description of the Fairlands, how the people live there, how they are ruled, customs, what they eat, and so on. And a description of the city of New Fair itself. For each street quarter we get a brief description, some points of interest, and example assignments. These are story hooks you can use to build adventures upon. I love to see those. We've got quite a bit of this. But then we also have the old fair sites. New Fair is erected upon the ruins of Old Fair. the fallen empire that used magic and created artifacts. So all of these dig sites could be points of contention, could be sources of magic phenomenon and horrors, house to spells, artifacts and monsters, and as such sources and locations for your adventures. And we got quite a bit of them. I'd say these are almost as many dig sites as we had city quarters before. And additionally to that, we get some points, places of interest around the city. Brilburn Mountains, Glassy, with their points of interest and example assignments once again. So there's a lot of world background information you can use for your adventures. So, yeah. Candela Obscura. Who is this for? Firstly, if you are a fan of Critical Role and if you have watched and enjoyed the Candela Obscura actual plays, like I have, and want to play it for yourself, then get this book and I don't think you will be disappointed. The second group is players of horror RPGs in general. Maybe you're looking for something new, maybe less cosmic horror and more gothic horror. And especially if you're looking for a narrative-focused system that lends itself well to campaign play. The rules in here means that the characters will survive most of the adventures, but they will change, and the relationship between the characters will change. So playing a long-form campaign is more interesting with this game than just a one-shot. I don't think this is a good system for a one-shot, actually. Lastly, I think, if you build on this, if you use all of the secret organizations, if you use the potential Cold War between the nations and go for this intrigue and espionage play, then this could be great for people who enjoyed Vampire the Masquerade or similar, but are looking for something new and different with, once again, a heavy narrative focused for long-form campaign play. If you are into this complicated intrigue adventures, I think there's real potential in here to do this type of long-form campaign with many secret organizations, people of power, diplomacy and intrigue and backstabbing and terrible black magic and consequences. And who knows, if this is successful enough, maybe Derrington Press will put out more books in that vein. Speaking about books, other books to use this with. You can of course play in the Fairlands with any other horror role-playing system, like Call of Cthulhu for example. And since monsters and NPCs in here don't have stats at all, it is easy to import monsters, powerful NPCs, spells, artifacts, whatever, into Candela Obscura and use them in your narrative. And I think obscure spell books like the Book of Gob, and especially a monster manual, big collection of scary monsters, would be a worthwhile addition to this book, because there is not a lot of monsters, artifacts and spells in here. For now, I bid thee farewell, Dreamers, until we shall meet again.